Welcome to a Legalbytes presentation of the Karen Reed murder trial. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel we make sense of the law one bite at a time. If you want more on the background of the Karen Reed case, check out our video on it linked in the description below. But otherwise, you be the jury. Did Karen Reed murder her Boston PD boyfriend John O'Keefe, or is she being framed by local police who Reed says are actually responsible for O'Keefe's death? Tell us what you think. But in the process, the one rule is don't be a dingus. Remember, everyone comes from their own perspective and opinion, and everyone comes to conclusions at their own pace. Agree or disagree, but always respectfully. Okay, let's get into it. All right, you guys. So we now have another doctor. Wait a minute. Dr. Justin Rice, we already saw. Which doctor is this? Let me go back for a second. Sorry, I'm mid thought when we open this up today. Welcome back. Welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming in from. I hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome to the afternoon session of day 18 of the Karen Reed murder trial. We spent the morning with Brian Higgins with the rest of his cross-examination. Then we did not get to see the testimony of the niece and nephew. And then we heard testimony, I guess we heard testimony from the doctor, the treating ER doctor at the medical center for John O'Keefe for when he was brought in on the morning of January 29th, 2022. Now we have another doctor who is going to be testifying. Let me see here. What was the name? Come on. Oh, you know what? Hang on. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to get it.
All right, so your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth called Dr. Gary Fowler to the stand.
Dr. Gary Fowler. Okay, sorry about that. Now we can fast forward a bit.
In order to keep this room.
And we're gonna go back. We're gonna get it. We'll get it. I promise. Okay, here we go. Dr. Gary Fowler. Let me just see if I can find him in. I don't see him on the witness list. I don't know if maybe I missed him, but give me 1 second. Dr. Gary Fowler. Okay, so we're gonna get this updated in the chat and all the places. Sorry for a little bit of a chaotic start. We will be getting on this. Also, let's see here. Andy the Game Maker, thank you so much for the super chat. This, of course, if you guys are unfamiliar, this is my older brother. Don't be a dingus. Where have we heard this before? Yeah, of course. We got this from Dr. Steve Brule, hence the little reference to him visually in the intro. Yeah, don't be a dingus. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Janet G in the chat. He's a doctor at Good Samaritan Medical Center. So that is good to know as well. I will make sure that ends up in the pinned chat. Okay, here we go. Before, I just want to get this all right up in here. Okay, I hope you guys had a good break. I had a nice quick one. And we are back. This is the 47th witness now. Okay. All right. Here we go. Any questions in the chat? And I will save them and answer them when we can. And otherwise, let's get to the testimony, shall we? Yeah, Andy, you did introduce me to him. Thank you. Thanks for the super chat.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Gary Fowler, F as in Frank, A-L-L-E-R.
Oh.
And sir, that microphone in front of you, you can move that any way you wish. So if you want to bring it up or down, just the wand itself.
I'm going to.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm a pathologist.
And where is it that you work?
I work at Good Samaritan Medical Center.
And how long have you been working as a pathologist at Good Samaritan?
Since November of 2015.
Now, if I could ask you just a few questions about sort of your educational background, starting with your undergrad, where did you go to school and what, if anything, did you receive a degree in?
My undergraduate education, I went to Tufts University.
All right, so doctor, I'm going to ask you to put the microphone perhaps underneath your mouth and speak
Oh,
into
okay.
it, because in order to keep this room cool, we need to have these fans going. If
Hard to
they
hear.
can't compete with you, we'll have to turn them off, and I think everybody would prefer to have them on. So please speak loudly.
How am I now? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So Tufts University, undergraduate, I have a degree in biology. That was,
And after you received your degree in biology from Tufts, where did you go from there?
I went to Tufts Medical School in Boston for 4 years there.
And after you graduated from medical school, where did you go from there?
I went to a residency in pathology, anatomic and clinical pathology at Tufts Medical Center. So I stayed within the Tufts system. Okay.
And how long was that residency?
That residency was, at the time, pathology residency was 5 years. It's now 4 years, I believe, but it's a 5-year program. I finished the residency with the chief of resident in pathology in my 5th year.
And then following your residency, where did you go for work from there?
In 1996, I finished residency, and my first job was at Kearney Hospital, beginning the end of June of 1996.
And how long did you work at the Carnegie?
I'm still on medical staff at Kearney, so ever since I was transferred to help Good Samaritan Medical Center in 2015. My full-time job is at Good Samaritan now since 2015, but I still cover Kearney Hospital every now and then.
And are you board certified?
I am board certified in both anatomic and clinical pathology.
You've used that term, and just if you could explain to the jury what your understanding of that term is as far as pathology and sort of the difference between anatomic pathology and clinical pathology.
Sure. Pathology, there's two subspecialties, I guess, in pathology. One is anatomic pathology, which is basically if you, as a patient, go to a hospital or have a biopsy, or a tissue biopsy, or an excision, or anything like that, it comes to the pathology department, and an anatomic pathologist is responsible for making the diagnosis for that patient. So we abbreviate that as an AP, anatomic pathologist. So in residency, you can also train to become a clinical pathologist. And clinical pathologist is a pathologist who basically deals with, to put it simply, if you have a blood test that gets sent to the lab, we are essentially responsible for the quality and the safety of that blood test to help ensure the lab tests that are done on the specimens are accurate.
Now,
Thank goodness he's able to answer some questions here. I already feel a lot better with this witness than with the prior witness.
with regard to your position at Good Samaritan, what is it that you do at Good Samaritan? What are your sort of duties and responsibilities in relation to that hospital?
So, I am the chief of pathologist at Good Samaritan Medical Center. Also the laboratory medical director. So my job at Good Samaritan is to ensure, quality of both the anatomic pathology side of things as well as the clinical pathology side of things. Ultimately, my job is to help ensure that any laboratory report coming from Good Samaritan is accurate.
Now, the lab at Good Samaritan where the testing is done, is that accredited?
Yes, it is.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that accreditation means, who it's by, and sort of what goes into that accreditation process?
We are accredited by the College of American Pathologists. We abbreviate that as CAP, if I mention that later, just so you know. And the accreditation process, the CAP has been in business for 75 years or so. They, according to their website, are the preeminent accrediting body for medical laboratories. So what that means is every 2 years we have an in-depth laboratory survey. That's every 2 years, and there are over maybe 3,000 elements or checklist requirements that the CAP will look at in our lab, which ranges from anywhere, for quality, mainly quality control, making sure that we have enough staff members, just about anything that can affect a laboratory result. There is essentially a checklist requirement that we need to fulfill and pass. So that's every 2 years.
And is that accreditation, is that up to date as of now?
Yes, it is. We will be having another inspection. Our window opens in July, so it's coming up. We have a 3-month window where the CAP can come anytime unannounced. So.
And was that accreditation up to date prior to January 29th, 2022? Now, as far as the clinical portion of the lab, what are some of the things that get tested as far as what are some of the things that are tested for in the lab as far as blood work is concerned?
Many different things. As probably all of you know, when you go to a hospital, you have your blood tested, and the physician is looking for different tests such as like a sodium, a potassium, a chloride, some basic tests that if they show abnormality, that could help the clinician make a diagnosis on you. So the most common things would be like a glucose, sodium, potassium, chloride, stuff like that.
Now, is there's some sort of like standard algorithm for things that are tested, or does it sort of dependent on the patient's presentation?
I think it's depends on the patient's presentation. There's no standard ordering test that one can order. So it depends mainly on what the doctor is thinking and his differential diagnosis. He will order, a variety of different tests. Some tests are pretty standard. When you go to a hospital, they might order, the test that I just talked about, a CBC. They want to look at your complete blood count.
Just a little louder, please.
Okay, sure. Things like that. Want to look at your hemoglobin, hematocrit, maybe sodium, potassium. Those are some of the really common tests that would get ordered in the hospital.
Now, as far as drugs of abuse, including alcohol, is that something that's dependent upon the presentation of a patient to your facility?
I think an alcohol test or a drug of abuse test is not a routine type of order or test. It all depends on if the clinician or the primary care physician is suspecting could be drugs of abuse or alcohol on board, and they need to know if so to help treat the patient.
Now, would that also include sort of a patient that presents in regard to a mental health status or Section 12 drugs of abuse? Would that be somewhat standard in relation to testing or blood work that's done in relation to that kind of patient?
As far as Section 12, I do not know if there is a standing order for a routine ordering process for a patient that is admitted to Good Samaritan under Section 12. So I'm not sure.
Would that be abnormal, though, as far as doing a blood draw and testing for alcohol and someone presenting on Section 12?
I don't think so, no.
Now, with regard to a blood draw in Good Samaritan Hospital with reference to testing for alcohol specifically, what, if any, sort of policies or protocols are in place in reference to that type of blood draw?
I think a test for blood alcohol is the phlebotomist pretty much has to run through the same protocol that he or she needs to follow for any type of blood test, except for the fact that we do not want to use an alcohol swab to clean the area before the blood draw. In theory, if you use an alcohol swab and you're testing for alcohol, then you can, in theory, contaminate the blood sample with some of the residual fluid of the alcohol. Some people say if you let the alcohol swab dry for 30 seconds, it's not going to contaminate it, but we don't go by that process. We have it specifically in our policy never to use an alcohol swab when an alcohol test is ordered.
Now, in that vein, Doctor, with reference to Good Samaritan and the emergency department, what, if any, precautions have you or your facility taken in regard to those types of blood draws in testing for alcohol with regard to alcohol wipes being used?
My phlebotomy supervisor has removed essentially all, not 100%, but all of the alcohol swabs down in the emergency room. So a phlebotomist who perhaps could forget, which they shouldn't, because we have competency policies for them. So we have that in place where she's removed almost all of them so somebody can't mistakenly use a swab down in the emergency room.
Okay, so keep your voice up again, please, Doctor, especially at the end of your sentences. Thank you.
So what we are getting at here is they're going to be talking about Karen Reed's blood draw, because there's this question as to what kind of alcohol percentage she had in her blood at the time of this draw. Now, what that can tell us as to how much she drank the night before is a big, big question. There's a big asterisk there, right? Because, how much did she drink? We've got some testimony from other people. This is a really big issue in this case. We've got some testimony that she maybe had one drink in front of them at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, which she brought in from McCarthy's bar previously. People say that it was vodka, but no one really seems to know for sure, because no one smelled it. No one sipped it. No one, so here, this is going to be very interesting to get her blood alcohol content at that hour. But we're talking about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning or what have you, 8, 7:30, whenever it was that they did this blood draw. Did she also go home that night and try to or the next morning and kind of calm her nerves? Is there any sort of an impact from her medications for MS? This is going to be some very interesting points that will need to be gone over in this testimony.
And so, Doctor, the removal of those alcohol wipes from the emergency department of Good Samaritan, does that predate January 29th, 2022?
It's been in place for a long time.
Exactly.
Before that, there was a policy they would use betadine for swabbing, but that policy has been in place for a long time, and before that day of 2022.
You've spoken a little bit about, as far as phlebotomists working within Good Samaritan. If you could just explain to the jury sort of what is a phlebotomist and what is it that they do?
A phlebotomist is any person who is trained to draw your blood when you come to a hospital. So if you come in, we train people to draw the blood.
And as far as with regard to phlebotomists at Good Samaritan, you mentioned that there's some proficiency testing or some protocols that they have to adhere to. Can you explain that a little bit more to the jury as far as what's involved in those?
So with anybody who works in the laboratory, per cap checklist requirements and the government's requirements. There has to be competency policies and assessments on anybody who works in our laboratory, including phlebotomists. So any new phlebotomists, they get an initial training, and there's a or they'll get a training, and then they have to be assessed to make sure that they know what their job, what they need to do for their job, including knowledge of all policies. Then after that, after initial training, our competency policy states that we need to assess them again at 6 months. We do the same thing, make sure they know what they're doing. And then 6 months from that, so that's a year from when they started working for us, and then annually thereafter. So the CAP is, we have all these competency policies for everyone to make sure the lab technicians know what they're doing. We also have competency policies for pathologists as well. So it's all about making sure the final result is that comes from our lab is a good quality.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm showing you two sets of documents. If you could just look at those and then look up on
Okay.
And just in general, do you recognize what those are?
Yes.
And what do you recognize those to be?
There are two of our policies that we have for Good Samaritan Medical Center, one for the phlebotomists, one for our laboratory technicians. The first one is a patient preparation for specimen collection policy, which defines our policy for drawing the blood for the phlebotomist. The second is an alcohol policy, which is one of, I don't know, thousands of policies that we have in the lab to describe how our policy for alcohol testing. Every laboratory test in our hospital has a separate policy.
Everything from hematocrit to sodium to potassium chloride has its own policy. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the policy you have before you, that's for alcohol testing?
Correct.
And those two policies that you have before you, were those policies what was in place on January 29th, 2022?
Correct. Yes.
May I approach again, Your
Okay.
Almost seek to introduce in a minute the next two exhibits.
Any objection? No objection. All right. So, Madam Court Reporter, I don't think we marked SS into evidence. Do we have that ready to go into evidence?
I don't believe so.
All right. So these instead, Madam Court Reporter, will be the next two exhibits.
Okay.
7.
I'm gonna fast forward through this part.
108 would be in the document as far as some medical records. Are you familiar with those records?
Yes.
Those records are in relation to a patient named Karen Reed that visited the Good Samaritan on January 29th, 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with reference to, may I approach again, Your Honor? Just
Yes.
Sure.
your attention to a previously tapped portion of those records. Do you see a result for alcohol within those records?
Mr. Lally, you have to keep your voice up when you're here as well.
Thank you.
Let me say it again, sir.
The internet,
Doctor, with
thank
reference to
you.
those records and the
Your
page
Honor.
that I've opened up to, do you see a record in regard to a lab result for alcohol testing with regard to Ms. Reed?
Yes.
And what is it reported as, sir?
It is reported at 93 milligrams per deciliter.
And is that, as far as milligrams per deciliter, is that a relatively standard way of reporting an alcohol result?
Yes, it is in our hospital systems.
Could you explain to the jury sort of milligram per deciliter what that reading means as far as the metric that's used there?
Well, it means 93 milligrams of alcohol per deciliter of the blood.
And as far as, if you could explain to the jury sort of the testing process or the protocols that are in place at the Good Samaritan. So the blood is drawn by the phlebotomist, and then what happens from there as far as the testing is concerned?
Okay, so
Before you do that, doctor, so we might have to turn off the fans, which we don't want to do. I really need you to keep your voice up so that the court officer over there, so that folks down there can hear you.
okay, so at Good Samaritan, I can go through the process. The doctor will order the test in the emergency room. We have 2 phlebotomists down in the emergency room. That test will print out, the order will print out down in the emergency room. And it will print out a label for the blood tube. It will print out on that label the color of the blood tube to be ordered, and will also print out what on the label what is to be tested in our lab. So that order will be seen by our phlebotomists in the emergency room. They will then locate the patient and perform the venipuncture or the blood draw, and use the correct tube. They'll go through their process of one of the most important processes in testing somebody's blood is accurate patient identification. So within our policy, we ask the patient to state his or her name, first and last name and date of birth. We have them say it out loud to make sure we have 2 forms of identification. Once that's confirmed, there is also a bracelet on the patient, so we'll match it up with a Good Samaritan ID number. So the first step is to make sure we have the correct patient. So then the phlebotomist has the order in front of her or him and uses the correct tube. Before drawing, they have to find the correct vein, a good vein for the patient, which is usually in the forearm antecubital fossa area. They will find that vein. They will cleanse the area with a non-alcohol swab, which in this case the order was for alcohol.
All right, so doctor, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you. I think part of it is that you're saying so much and your voice is fine, and then it drops, and it's fine, and then it drops. So Paul, can we turn the fans off, please?
Oof.
It's important that all the jurors hear everything you say, doctor.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so but speak into the microphone.
I'm going to bring it really close.
All right, this should be better with
and hopefully you can turn it back on when I get better at this.
Oh,
So
poor guy.
I'm sorry.
I do feel bad for him because he does seem very well intentioned. He's trying to testify well, and but he is relatively soft spoken. Doesn't also help that Lally is also very much like that. So he's. I think part of it is just how much he's saying in every single response.
It's hot. I'm hot too. One is we make sure that it's correct patient identification. We use the correct tube. We draw it. We don't use an alcohol swab. We use one that doesn't contain an alcohol in that. Then the phlebotomist will then put the labels on the tube or tubes in front of the patient. Then bring it back to his or her area. Make sure they sign their name they initial their name on the tube, as well as the time. Then it will be put into a bag, and in the emergency room, it goes through a chute and it goes directly to our laboratory for testing. Once we get it, it's called receiving the blood work. A technician, lab tech in our lab, will scan. There's a barcode on the label. They'll scan it, and that will document the time that we received it. They will also manually enter the name of the phlebotomist and the time of the blood draw, so we have accurate records of what we received and the time. Once that's done, it's entered into our system, and then the technician will decide what needs to go next. In this case of an alcohol test, we're using a green top tube, which has lithium heparin, has an anticoagulant in it. It's to prevent clotting. So we'll get that tube, and once it's entered, we will centrifuge it. And that is centrifuged for about 10 minutes or so, so that we can separate the layers of the blood. In the blood, when you first see blood, it's all red, and there's no separation of the elements. But within blood, there are red blood cells. There are white cells or inflammatory cells, and there's the liquid portion of the blood. So for alcohol testing, we there's an anticoagulant in it, and so we will centrifuge it to separate the different layers of the blood. The different layers, the red cells will go to the bottom, and the aqueous portion or the plasma portion will go to the top. And when we test for blood alcohol in our lab, we're testing the aqueous portion or the plasma portion of the blood. So that's why it's important for us to centrifuge it and separate the components. Once that is done, that takes about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer. Then that tube will be brought over to our machine, which is a Roche Cobas machine, and it will be put onto the machine, and that machine will test for the alcohol or whatever else is ordered on the patient.
So all right, so some folks asking, like, what is the point here? So it is important to talk a little bit about the process of having this blood be tested, because you want to make sure that it was tested in the right way, right? We want to make sure that he wasn't using red Solo cups to take the test or to take the blood and to transport it and all that kind of good stuff. So we want to make sure that the process actually did happen in an appropriate kind of way. But he's getting so into the weeds that there's absolutely no way that this jury can follow unless they have their own medical background. And something tells me that if they do in fact have a medical background, they're probably not on the jury, because there's a good chance that they would be excluded, because there is a bit of medicine involved in this case. So, but what we are talking about here is Karen Reed's blood test. So testing it specifically for alcohol. That's really what we care about here. At the end of all of this is what was her blood alcohol content? What could have impacted that number? Any kind of medications, things that she ate, things that she drank, what that can possibly tell us about, what you can do to backtrack that. Do we know if she had any alcohol in between when she dropped John O'Keefe off and when she went to go look for him? I don't know. We have no testimony about that. That's a gap here that could be filled by some sort of evidence of, her actually drinking. I don't know. Maybe not. But that's a question. It's a gap. And no, he has not gotten yet to what her blood alcohol content was. So he's still getting there. He's on the way, but he's taken the long way there. Long way there, I should say. Also, thanks to all the folks who are in the chat here. If you have not yet done so and you are enjoying the coverage, please do like the stream. It really does help to push this out there to more people so they can join us in the coverage. So if you haven't done so, that is something that you can do in your spare time as you are listening to this very boring direct examination.
I think I covered everything.
Oh,
Now, with regard to, you used the term a couple times as far as a centrifuge, can you describe to the jury sort of what that is and how that instrument works?
Sure.
just like
So
We'll do.
when the tube that we take is a blood tube, and we want to test the aqueous plasma portion of the blood. And the only way to get that plasma portion, or the watery solution of the blood, is we put it in a centrifuge, which will spin the blood at a rapid rate. something like 3,300 RPMs or so, which is fast, and it will separate the blood into those three layers. Also, in the tubes that we use is a gel that comes in the tube, and it nicely separates the red blood cell component from the water or aqueous plasma component, and keeps those two portions of the blood separate to make it easier for us to test on our machine.
Now, as far as the blood testing is concerned, is there a difference between sort of what's known as whole blood versus serum and plasma?
There is a difference. Whole blood is basically the whole blood. When somebody has a test drawn, and if we test something on the entire blood without separating it, that would be whole blood. If we say we're testing on plasma or serum, we're actually separating the components of the blood by the centrifuge process.
Now, which of the two, as far as serum plasma versus the whole blood, which would record as far as a higher percentage of alcohol in the testing?
Alcohol, the answer would be plasma or serum would have a little bit higher blood alcohol content compared to whole blood.
As far as
So I at least know about whole blood and the plasma thing because of donating blood, because there's a distinction between people who are donating whole blood. It's just you're donating blood versus people who are donating specifically plasma. There are some people that do that. So I at least have that understanding. TJM, thank you so much for the super chat. First time here. Thanks for the content. Well, thank you for joining us, and thanks for the super chat. Watching you while making rodeo chaps. That is so cool. That is so cool. Well, enjoy. I hope that project works out well. Also, Sheena Ford gifted 1 Legalbytes membership. Thank you so much. Very kind and generous of you, Sheena. So Kelly, you have been gifted a membership by Sheena Ford. So welcome. Welcome to Bite Club. Very happy to have you here as well. Hope you guys can join us for the members only live stream on Friday, 10 a.m. East Coast time.
Separation that you're talking about, is there a specific area as far as the separation is concerned where alcohol tends to concentrate within?
Yes, alcohol tends to go into the more into the watery or the aqueous component of the blood. So when we like serum or plasma has a 98%, reportedly 98% water component. Whole blood, if you look at the whole blood overall, it has a lesser percentage. If you look in the literature, it can be 86%, or there's a range. But so since alcohol tends to go to the watery components, if you measure alcohol like we do in hospitals on the serum or plasma, the value that we get will always be a little bit higher than total, than measuring on whole blood.
Aware of, through your training and experience, sort of a conversion that can be done between sort of what's reported as the testing from the serum plasma to a whole blood count?
In the hospital, we're pretty much in the business of, reporting alcohol, in serum or plasma, and we're not in the business of the legal aspects of alcohol testing, because alcohol, what I understand is the alcohol legal limit in Massachusetts is 0.08 grams per deciliter. We don't make any conversions in a hospital. We're not in that business to do that. We just report on the serum percentage or the plasma level, and we don't make any attempts to do any official conversion to a whole blood level. If we did, we'd have to validate, we'd have to do many studies, and we're just not in the business for that.
And I understand that's not how it's reported within your record or at your facility. What my question is, are you aware of a process by which you can sort of then mathematically convert from milligrams per deciliter to a gram?
I am aware of that. recently I had to read about it, but up until recently I was not aware. So I'm not in that. We're not in the business for whole blood, but there is a formula. I do know about it, and it's there is a if one wants to convert a whole a serum or a plasma level to a whole blood, there are formulas that basically you need to. It's a simple formula, but there's varying opinions on which formula can be used.
Elaine, your mic. All right. So sorry about that. Muted. Yeah, it's because I was eating almonds and I didn't want to crunch into the mic. So okay. So let me just go back and say what I said. So this is going to be ample territory for cross-examination. This is going to be a big thing that they're going to go over, because what he just testified to basically is that for like legal reasons, they're not supposed to do conversions of the blood alcohol percentage that they find and into basically what they would do for blood alcohol content for legal, for like to be used in a court of law. And so this limits the applicability of his testimony in this particular case. And I anticipate that the defense is really going to hammer that into the jury to say, you really can't, you cannot hang your hat on this information to show that she had a certain blood alcohol content. So that's going to be a really big thing. And also what he just said specifically was that there are multiple types of calculations. Not everybody agrees. And so, like there are different ways that you can kind of calculate to convert, but there's really no consensus over it. That is going to be a big thing on cross-examination, because that's going to be really important to the defense here to basically say, this is unreliable. Jury, you cannot rely on this to try to say that her blood alcohol content was at a certain point at the time that she actually supposedly hit John O'Keefe, like at the time of this incident. No way. So this is going to be a very big point. All right, let's continue.
Now, as far as this specific patient, the defendant, Ms. Reed, do you have any sense from the chart in front of you as far as sort of the timeline of when the blood was drawn to when it was tested and reported and things of that nature?
I think it was the order was 9:03 in the morning. 5 minutes later, the phlebotomist, it happened pretty fast. 5 minutes later, the phlebotomist got the labels printed. Then 5 minutes after that, they went in and drew it. It was very quickly. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but ultimately it was received in our lab, I think, 10 minutes after the order, the blood, very quickly. And then the final result, when the alcohol level was reported in the computer system, was, I think, 50 minutes from the time of the order.
Thank you, sir. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay.
And that lab results done pursuant to the testing and the policies and the protocols and everything in your lab was 93 milligrams per deciliter. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Cross-examination?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You testified that, hospitals are not in the legal business of calculating BACs. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes,
Boom. What did I tell you? What did I tell you?
And you'd agree that there are differences between screening tests that are conducted at hospitals and forensic tests that are done in labs, correct?
correct.
And the purpose of testing in sort of a clinical setting at a hospital is to assist in the quick diagnosis and treatment of a patient. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And so your priorities may be different than those if you're in a forensic lab where the goal is to ensure accuracy and reliability at all costs, correct?
I don't agree. Not correct.
Well, hospitals use serum tests to screen for the presence of alcohol, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that serum testing does not measure alcohol directly, but it actually measures the presence of NADH.
Correct.
And NADH is the byproduct that's created when the body breaks down alcohol.
Correct.
And the reason hospitals use a serum test rather than a whole blood test is because it's quick and efficient and you can get test results within 20-ish minutes. Does that sound about right?
Correct.
And you'd agree that NADH, which is what serum essentially tests for, can also be elevated by factors other than alcohol
There we go.
in the blood.
I'm not aware of that.
Are you familiar?
Yep.
Are you familiar with any medical literature that has found that NADH is created when the body has elevated either lactate or LDH in the system?
Correct. There are some issues, in our policy. There are some factors that can lead to falsely elevated or falsely lowered serum alcohol. One is lactic acid or LDH. Another one is Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, which is a hematological problem, and other things that can interfere with not just any test or lipids, high levels of lipids or hemolysis or high levels of bilirubin. But our machines are very sophisticated now. If there are any elevations of, let's say, hemolysis or lipids or bilirubin, the Roche machines will detect that and flag it as a possible interference, or it won't even let us result a test. So with any test, there can be interferences, and I'm sure there can be interferences with the forensic way of testing as well.
All right, so there are other causes of high levels of LDH and therefore NADH also include things like trauma, muscle weakness and loss of muscle tissue, or abnormal tissue formation. Is that correct? Have you read studies about that?
I haven't read those studies, no.
Would you agree that there may be other sort of medical stressors or things that can't necessarily be captured by the technology, but that could cause error in testing?
I don't understand that question.
Well, you testified that there can be certain errors in testing. That's something that we see throughout all different types of sort of scientific literature, which includes ethanol testing.
Yep.
And there are certain sort of factors that could cause a higher level of NADH that might not necessarily be picked up by the machines that you use at the hospital. Is that correct?
I am not familiar. If there is, it's not not a common phenomenon. Our methodology for doing many tests are based on this NADH enzyme methodology, and we've never had issues with it. I read a lot. I haven't read about major faults of our methodology for testing. most hospitals, when we look at, when we actually have to do proficiency testing with any tests that we do in a hospital. So 3 times a year, we get sent unknown levels of alcohol and 5 samples to be accurate, 3 times a year. And we're able to look at not only our results, make sure they're correct, but we're able to look at how, what other hospitals are doing across the nation. So when I last looked, and it's held true for over 10 years, maybe 20 years, is that of the, I think, 5,000 hospitals that are testing for alcohol, it's over 80% of them are using our methodology, which is the alcohol dehydrogenase and NADH. And I can't imagine if, if there were any major issues with alcohol testing using that methodology, why would, it wouldn't be that high of a.
As you
Yep.
testified, the
Yep.
goal in a clinical setting, obviously, is to test for the presence of alcohol, but you're not in the business of trying to sort of calculate BAC, correct?
No, we don't. We don't.
So your goals are to make sure that you're screening for the presence of alcohol, but you're not quite as concerned with the precise amount that you might see in, for instance, a whole blood test in a forensic lab.
Well, we result in terms of in the serum. We know the Massachusetts laws and laws across the nation are based on whole blood, but there are in the literature formulas that you can use if it were a medical legal case that one can use to convert our level to a blood alcohol. We don't do it in a hospital. We won't report a serum alcohol and then we don't do the conversion, but because it's a very rare event that that a level will end up in court. But there are forensic lab people that can provide that formula.
And when you
I do wish that, so sometimes there's a benefit to just letting them run with the answer, because if they say a lot of words, sometimes it sounds like just a lot of nothing. And that's a lot of what he's doing here. Sometimes there is a benefit to letting them run, but I do kind of wish that Little would just like cut him off and be like, okay, but what I'm asking you is yes or no, as simple as possible, like with as simple an answer as you can possibly give me, like yes or no about XYZ. Like that's, I kind of wish that she would do that, but she's doing very well overall. And this whole thing about muscle weakness, abnormal muscle tissue kind of thing, there's going to be a tie-in with this issue and MS. So because, MS, you've got things going on with your muscles, or they're kind of like, my understanding is from like friends, parents, and, family friends and things like that who have had MS in the past, that, it's basically like a degenerative disease where like your muscles kind of slowly like break down, basically. That's my very crude understanding of it. So folks in the chat that, have a better, more detailed, nuanced, definition of it, feel free to chime in. But that's just kind of like what I've seen. So interesting. I want to see this as like more closely tied between MS and this particular kind of a test and what that means for the accuracy of the results.
get a test result from a serum test, that information does not establish when alcohol was consumed, correct?
Correct.
And so you're just looking at a specific point in time to say this is what the serum test reflects at 9:08 a.m. on January 29th.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Mr. Lally, any follow-up?
Just briefly. As far as the interferences or anything that would lead to elevated levels from your review of Ms. Reed's chart, was there anything like that present there?
I didn't see anything. No.
And the interferences would be accounted for in the sense of the machine would sort of vet them out and not result or not recorded in the chart if that were to occur. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
The form of the question, I'll sustain the objection. You can ask it differently.
Sure. Dr. Fowler, with regard to the interferences that you were talking about, what, if any, impact would that have on the results being reported?
If there were the three major things that could interfere with the result, like high lipids, hemolysis, or high bilirubin, our machine would flag that, and we would have some information that a result may not be valid. And sometimes we will report a result with a disclaimer, or sometimes if those levels are so high, we won't report it at all. But in this case, there were no flags.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything, Ms. Little, or are you all set?
If I could have one moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Just one moment, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, Dr. Fowler, thank you, and I'm sorry I gave you such a bad time
Oh,
about
okay,
your
I'm
voice.
sorry.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
this poor guy. Okay, so nothing. No actual.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Mr. Nicholas Roberts to the stand.
Okay.
Your Honor, may we approach this while the witness is coming in?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so updating the chat. Yeah, I feel so bad for that doctor because he seems to really know what he's talking about. But that's another example of someone who knows what he's talking about but then trying to translate that to another human being is a little bit harder. Okay. And updating some more things here. Okay. All right, let's fast forward a little bit.
Nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you. You can have a seat. I just need you to keep your voice up really loud. If you're too soft, we're going to have to turn off the air conditioning. Everyone's going to get mad at you. So.
No problem.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury, sir?
Sure, my name is Nicholas Roberts, Roberts.
And what is it that you do for work, sir?
I'm currently employed with a company called Thermo Fisher as a field service engineer
And how long have you been doing that?
since November of last year.
And so prior to that, or prior to November of last year, 2023, where did you work before that?
I was in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the toxicology unit.
And how long did you work in the toxicology unit at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Since October of 2014.
Now, if I could turn your attention to prior to joining the lab for the Massachusetts State Police, can you talk a little bit about your educational background? Where did you go to school and what did you go to school for?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in applied forensic science with a concentration in chemistry and toxicology from Mercyhurst University. That's in Erie, Pennsylvania. And then I also have a master's degree in forensic toxicology from the University of Glasgow in Scotland.
Now, after receiving your degree from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, where did you go from there?
I returned home to the British Virgin Islands, where I taught at a community college,
And what did you teach there?
mainly chemistry and a term or two of physics.
And then following your teaching in the Virgin Islands, where did you go from there?
I was hired then at the Mass State Police Crime Lab.
Now, when you're initially hired at the Mass State Police Crime Lab, you're working initially as a forensic scientist 1, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your duties and responsibilities are, what your work looks like as a forensic scientist 1?
So a forensic scientist 1, you're essentially going through all the trainings that they provide at the lab. We do a number of different testing, mainly on blood and urine, looking for the presence of drugs and alcohol. We also do serum conversions and retrogrades. So during your training period, I started as a FS1, so that went up until I was fully signed off to actually write reports that would be issued to ADAs across the whole of Massachusetts, in which I became a forensic scientist 2.
And so what are the different
This guy so far seems like someone who is very intelligent and has had proper training for the technical aspect of it, but he also seems like the kind of person that can actually talk to a human. So let's see how this direct examination goes.
difference, sir, between sort of your work as a forensic scientist 1 versus your work as a forensic scientist 2?
So essentially, as a 2, you're essentially fully trained, and you're able to do all the testing that we do in house. You also are able to go and give testimony based on the reports that you write. Whereas in a forensic scientist 1, you're still in that training process.
And did you work essentially as a forensic scientist 2 from that point in time till the time that you left the lab in November of 23?
Yes.
Now, with reference to while you were working at the lab, was there sort of an ongoing, continuing educational component?
Yeah, so we would habitually receive articles based on different discoveries within the forensic field. So different ways they would find certain types of drugs in different bodily fluids. It's always a revolving door when it comes to drugs being discovered as well as being manufactured, what's illicit on the street, et cetera, et cetera. We would often get different articles, just research papers based on what they're doing to discover these things within the matrices that we are looking at.
Now, in addition to that, while you worked at the lab, what, if any, are you familiar with the term proficiency testing?
Yes.
And what, if any, proficiency testing would you undergo while you were at the lab?
So we receive both in-house and external proficiency tests. Essentially, the process would be just the same. The only difference would be we'd have internal people sending us samples as if it came from an external source. And then the external proficiency testing that we receive is actually part of our accreditation. So it came in just like regular samples, and we would test it accordingly per our protocols.
And as far as the proficiency testing that you undertook over the course of your time at the lab, did you pass each of those tests?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned a little bit as far as accreditation with regard to the lab. What, if any, accreditation did the State Police Crime Lab have?
We had accreditation. It's a internationally accreditation board for forensics scientists, as well as any kind of lab in particular, and the branch that our lab would have fall under. We have a certain set of rules that we have to adhere to. Mainly, it's a standard known as an ISO 17025. But we have a different accreditation board, and they have narrower requirements because of the type of lab that we are.
It may be pretty well understood, but that as far as the accreditation is concerned, that's done through an external entity. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the lab, as far as your assignment of work, at the time that you left the lab, about how many forensic scientists were working within the lab in your toxicology?
By the time that I left?
Yes.
Ooh. So within the toxicology unit, there was one more when at the time that I left.
And as far as you and sort of the other forensic scientists too, the time that you worked at the lab, was there some sort of rotation, or how were you assigned work as it related to your work in the toxicology?
So throughout my time there, we had more forensic scientists, ones and twos, and we would delegate each type of assignments that we would look for to different types of testing. On a monthly basis, we would get a different group of tests that we would perform throughout that month, and it would rotate to the next person as the month at the end of the month. So that's how we did the testing.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to May of 2022, you're working with the lab at that time, is that correct?
Yes,
And were you assigned to serum conversions at that particular time?
I was. Yes,
And at some point, were you specifically assigned to a case involving a Ms. Karen Reed?
yes.
Now, as far as a serum conversion is concerned, if you could explain to the jury sort of what goes into that process and what is it that you're reviewing or you're looking at, how is a serum conversion, what is it, and how is it performed?
Sure. So with serum conversions, usually what happens is that we get hospital results. So that would be the police or the ADAs would get results from the hospitals that whoever was attended to. We get the results, and usually hospital alcohol results they use serum in order to test alcohol. Serum is essentially the liquid portion of blood. Let's say, for instance, you fall and you cut yourself, that red stuff that comes out, that has serum within it. What the hospital does, they centrifuge it or spin it very fast in order to get the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and all kinds of the heavier materials out of that blood. And what's left is a serum. So they use that to test their alcohol. What studies have shown is that we actually tend to have a higher alcohol concentration in serum than in blood. So what that means is that due to the chemical nature of alcohol, it likes to stay in that liquid portion more than throughout the whole blood. So a serum conversion essentially is able to convert the alcohol content from that serum that we get from the hospital into what it would be in whole blood.
See what I mean? He's able to talk to humans, like in a human kind of way. He gave like one, like it was a bit of a lengthy response, but it was a good, succinct, complete response. I just said succinct after lengthy. You know what I mean? It was like comprehensive and yet like didn't go crazy all over the place. And he was clear in his explanation. So great. What a relief.
And did you have occasion to perform a serum conversion in regard to Ms. Reed's medical records?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a document, just ask you to review that if something finished. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to?
So this is the serum conversion report that I made, with the calculations were made on May 3rd of 2022.
And as far as the result that you received, in addition, so what kind of materials did you receive in order to perform that analysis?
We got the medical records.
May I approach the witness again?
Yes.
I apologize, Your Honor. If I could, looking for the exhibits. So I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 106. And directing your attention to this last page contained within this document here. Is that a portion of the medical records that you reviewed in regard to Ms. Reed's serum alcohol level?
Yes.
And if you could, what was reported in the medical records that you reviewed and using in your serum conversion analysis as far as the level?
The level was at 93 milligrams per deciliter.
And so with regard to that 93 milligrams per deciliter, I'm sorry, was there also a time that specimen was collected as far as your review of those records?
Yes,
And what was that time, sir?
it was at 9 in the morning, 9:08.
Now, as far as just in terms of the general term, as far as forensic science, what you did at the lab, can you explain what that term means or what you did in relation to that?
What do you mean specifically?
That was very poorly phrased.
Yes,
Try to restate
like
that.
a lot of your questions.
What is your understanding of forensic science, and can you explain that?
Oh, forensic science is essentially a scientific study based on anything dealing with the law. So whether it comes to ballistics or DNA analysis or toxicology, like I did, anything focused or based on the law or for legal purposes, essentially that's what forensic science kind of encapsulates.
And forensic toxicology, would that sort of be a subset of forensic science?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your understanding based on your training and experience, what is forensic toxicology?
So toxicology in general is essentially just a study of poisons, plainly speaking. So anything that'd be harmful to the body, essentially that would be toxicology, because you also not only have forensic toxicology, but you also have like environmental. And the forensic toxicology is just, like I said, again, with the forensic science, it's just basing it on things for legal purposes.
Now, through your training experience, are you familiar with sort of the difference between a serum plasma level versus a whole blood level?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what your understanding is of each and what, if any, differences there are between the two?
So just plainly your serum plasma level, or the serum plasma is what it's called. It could be referred to as either or one or the other. So that is just the alcohol level in your serum, whereas your whole blood is your alcohol content or regular BAC in the whole blood. This difference between the two is, like I said previously, in your serum or plasma, that alcohol content would be higher as it would have been in the whole blood.
Now, as far as the milligrams per deciliter, how that's recorded in the Good Samaritan medical records referencing Ms. Reed that you reviewed in this case, is that typical as far as how hospitals would report sort of the serum plasma levels?
Yeah, from my experience and all the times that I've seen serum conversions come to the lab, milligram per deciliters are the units that they use from the hospital, yeah.
Now, as far as that 93 milligrams per deciliter, what, if anything, with regard to serum conversion, what, if anything, are you then able to do to convert that to a BAC or a blood alcohol concentration?
So based on some studies, they came up with a few different conversion factors, knowing that the blood alcohol content would be higher than the serum plasma content. They're able to apply different conversion factors to the numbers that we would get in serum. And we usually get, excuse me, we usually give a low, an average, and a high, being that it's kind of hard to say what one particular person's conversion factor would be between the two of them, since it's dependent upon like age, sex, the water content, what you had to eat that day. So it's harder to pinpoint. Therefore, we give a good range as what it could possibly be pertaining just in case a person converts, or their conversion would be a lot lower or higher. So we give a good range.
And as far as those,
So this is going to be where the cross-examination really hammers in, is on this calculation, and how they can't even narrow it down to a specific number. They have to, the best that they can do is to nail it down to some sort of a range. But I anticipate that the defense is still going to call into question that range, that whatever range that they end up giving, because of the fact that, there are other factors. Have they considered this factor and these other things? So I think that's where this cross-examination is really going to focus in. And I have a feeling it's going to be Miss Little doing that part again. Also, I see in the chat. Yeah, I know. I've got some room service here. Very, very kind to that my mom and Mr. Bites are kind of double teaming on providing me with some snacks while we watch. So they're very, very sweet.
Different conversion factors, where do those come from?
It's based on some studies. I don't remember the actual names of the papers that were thing, but they are based on studies throughout the forensic world when it comes to looking at specifically testing blood and serum to find that conversion factor.
And as far as those studies are concerned, do they come from sort of different population bases? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's how they were able to get the range of conversion factors that they use.
Now, as far as the water within the serum, or sort of how that works with the centrifuge, what, if any, relationship does that have to the reading that you get or the conversion factors that you use?
So the water content, essentially, if the serum being the liquid portion of the blood, water is also liquid. It makes up some of that serum that you get from it. Therefore, your higher water content, more essentially, the lower the concentration could be of that, or lower or higher, depending upon whether or not your water content in that sample is lower or higher.
So as far as those different conversion factors that you're using, this is essentially a mathematical calculation, is that right?
Yes.
And so the different conversion factors that you're using for the low, the average, and the high, what are those conversion factors?
So the low is a 1.18, with the average being a 1.14, and then the high being a 1.12.
So based on your analysis, as far as the medical records, what was reported to you, using those three conversion factors, what, if anything, did you come up with as far as the low and average and high for the 93 milligrams per deciliter?
So our values that were calculated for the low was a 0.078 gram percent. The high was a 0.083 gram percent, with the average being a 0.081.
Now, sir, with reference to the alcohol that's reported in the records, are you familiar with, are there different types of alcohol?
Yes.
And can you explain sort of what those types are and what the differences are, or where they come from?
Sure. So there are multiple different types of alcohol, mainly based on the number of carbons that are within that molecule. You start off with methanol, which is one carbon. Methanol you can find in like some rubbing alcohols. You can find them in many different labs. We have big, large vials of them. Ethanol, which has two carbons. That one is the common one that is in our alcoholic beverages, and it goes all the way up isopropanol, octanol, etc. It all depends on the number of carbons in the chain of it.
And the type that's reported within Ms. Reed's medical records, that was ethanol, correct?
Correct.
And so with regard to your training experience as a forensic toxicologist, are you familiar with a term known as a central nervous system depressant?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that term means and how it relates to alcohol?
Sure. So alcohol is what is classified as a central nervous system depressant. And essentially, the name kind of gives it away as to what it does. Your central nervous system is responsible for essentially all your movements, both involuntary and voluntary. So the way you move your head, the way you blink, the way you breathe, the central nervous system is responsible for all of that. With a depressant introduced into the body, it affects that central nervous system, causing things to slow down. So that's essentially what depressant means. It's going to slow down certain processes that a central nervous system would be in charge of. So you can have delayed reaction times. It can cause drowsiness.
Ask another question.
How would that manifest as far as a central nervous depressant affecting the body?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Go ahead.
There are many different effects that you could see, or side effects from having a central nervous system depressant in the body. Lethargy, sleepiness, drowsiness, unable to walk properly. Any kind of any one of those tests that you see on TV from the police when they try to get your horizontal gaze and they try to make sure you're coordinated, it can affect all those things.
Now, sir, are you also familiar through your training and experience of working in forensic toxicology with a term known as retrograde extrapolation?
Yep.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
So a retrograde extrapolation is essentially another calculation, but it allows you to be able to calculate what the possible blood alcohol content would have been at a time prior to when the blood was drawn. Say, for instance, blood was drawn at 2, you could essentially figure out what the blood alcohol content would have been at 10 in the morning prior to it.
This is another area that the defense is definitely going to be getting really, really deep into the weeds on, because it's like now you have one calculation to reach the BAC at the current time that she was tested. That requires math. There are ways that can get wonky. There are different factors that you need to include. Other factors, have they considered all of the important factors for this particular case? Then you take that and you extrapolate it even further with another mathematical calculation, more factors that could be different. So, they started off with one range. Now they're going to have to expand that range over. Also, they're going to what kind of assumptions did they have to make as to her behavior, as to medications she took, alcohol she took, when she did, food she had, things like that. I'm curious to see what he's going to say about all of that. And, if that comes out on direct examination, it's probably going to come out on cross. So either way, it'll probably come out on cross.
And that's done with the calculation as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what are some of the types of information that you would need to know, or that you would want to know in order to perform a retrograde extrapolation?
We'd need to know, one, for sure, what the alcohol content would have been. We also need to know the time that the blood was drawn, as well as the time of the last alcohol consumption.
Now, in regard to timing, as far as what, if any, limitations are there in regard to performing retrograde extrapolation as it pertains to timing is concerned?
So when we do these calculations, anything that's shorter than 2 hours, we usually don't do that conversion.
And why is that, sir?
Because we're built in within our calculations, we allow for 2 hours. That has to do with the way that alcohol leaves the body. If the alcohol is still being absorbed by the body, we want to give it enough time to get to a point where it's coming out of the body as opposed to increasing in the body. So that 2 hours puts the person at a point in which that alcohol be coming out as opposed to it being absorbed.
So there are essentially 3 different sort of phases as far as intake of the alcohol into the body through dissipation. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are usually there's a well-known kind of metabolism route to which alcohol metabolizes out of the body. Yes.
And so, can you describe to the jury sort of that metabolism process as far as how it starts to its end?
Sure. So with having, let's say, one drink, what the body begins to do at that point is absorb the alcohol. Usually you get like a steady line that increases with time. So if you think of a regular chart where you have the level of alcohol in the body versus time, which would be on the y-axis or the x-axis at the bottom, as time goes along, after your first drink, the body starts to absorb the alcohol. If that was your only drink and that was it, the body then at a certain point, it stops absorbing it because there's no more to absorb, and it plateaus. So essentially the line goes straight. After that point, the body starts to eliminate it at this point. And then your level or your concentration of alcohol within the body decreases with time as it's getting rid of it.
And so there's sort of the absorption phase, a plateau, and then the elimination phase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that in the course of your analysis for retrograde extrapolation, it's important to know sort of when the last drink was. Is that right?
Yes.
And why is that?
That way we can get a good time in and figure out the amount of time that has passed between the last drink as well as the time that the blood was taken.
Now, did you perform a retrograde extrapolation analysis with regard to Ms. Reed's BAC or the converted BAC from the serum conversion?
I did.
And so with reference to Ms. Reed, as far as you looked at obviously the hospital records, you looked at the serum conversion report, what, if anything else, did you review or look at in coming to that retrograde extrapolation analysis?
We usually get a police incident report, and that usually identifies the time in which, per their narrative, what time in which they had the last drink.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
So again, presenting you with the document, if you could just look at that and look up and finish. Do you recognize that document, sir?
I do.
And what do you recognize it for?
This is the retrograde extrapolation report that I did for the subject of Karen Reed.
Now, with respect to the time that you utilized in that report, as far as when was the time that you utilized as far as the last drink or time of operation?
The time that was utilized as the last drink, it was at 12:45.
That'd be 12:45 a.m., is that correct?
Correct.
And so you're using that to sort of extrapolate from 9:08 a.m. when the 93 milligram per deciliter is reported from Good Samaritan to 12:45 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that 12:45 a.m., what, if any, difference would it make if it were a little bit off of that? Say it was 12:30 a.m. or it was 1 or 1:10 a.m. What, if any, impact would that have on your conversion?
So we tend to go by hours. So we kind of round to the nearest, I think, 15-minute interval. So a couple minutes or 10 to 20 minutes forward or behind of that 12:45, it wouldn't change the results by a lot, if any.
And similar to the serum conversion, is this done with different conversion factors as far as a low, an average, and a high?
So we usually just calculate a minimum and a maximum for the retrograde, and that incorporates some conversions as well.
Now, as far as the minimum versus the maximum, what of each of those sort of signify, or how do you come to those mathematical calculations?
So with the minimum calculation, we incorporate the 2-hour period. So we assume that maybe that 12:45 wasn't, the body wasn't at that point finished with the elimination. It wasn't in the elimination phase, so we allow it for 2 hours ahead of it. We also have a conversion factor. Once again, this is a study that was done to see the elimination rate of different people within a population, what rate they would get alcohol out of their system per hour. So we implied the lower limit, which was a 0.1 gram percent per hour, with that 2-hour allotted time interval, and then we use the lower serum conversion number, the one that was converted on the lower end. We use all of that in the calculation in order to come up with the minimum. The maximum one uses the opposite. So it uses the higher converted serum conversion number with the higher elimination rate, using the full amount of time.
And these calculations or these conversion factors are all based on sort of medical studies that you reviewed in literature that goes into your training?
Yeah, all of it was part of the training, and they came up with those numbers prior to even when I was hired there. But it is based on multiple different studies in that, looking at that elimination rate.
And so from your calculations, when it came to the minimum with regard to the retrograde extrapolation, what, if any, calculation, what, if any, result did you come from with your calculations as it pertains to the minimum?
So the minimum amount that was calculated would have been a 0.135 gram%.
And that's essentially reporting in a blood alcohol concentration, is that correct?
Correct.
And then with regard to the maximum, what, if any, result did you get from your mathematical calculations in regard to that?
The result was a 0.292 gram%.
And so that range that you receive is a bit of a wide range. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And why is that?
So we base those calculations. They're based on that conversion that I did from the hospital results from serum, giving us a good range of values in the first place. But then we incorporate the retrograde extrapolation one, which uses a time factor, and that 2-hour difference using two different elimination rates that causes a wider span of values. And it's just so that it can encompass essentially anybody within the general population, that they would be somewhere in between that lower limit and that upper limit.
So essentially, from those mathematical calculations, anyone within sort of the general population with that result would be somewhere between the 0.13 and the 0.29, correct?
Correct.
May I approach just to retrieve your arm?
Yes.
I could have one moment, Charles.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Okay. Ms. Little?
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You used a method called retrograde extrapolation to reach your sort of opinions and conclusions in this case, correct?
Yeah, it was a calculation.
And that means that you rely on an assumption that a trend will continue beyond sort of observable data.
So the metabolism is actually pretty well studied. So we know that that elimination rate, unless you introduce more alcohol into the system, it declines at that rate, and it's pretty linear.
Exactly. So in other words, certain assumptions are incredibly important for you to reach your analysis.
Sure.
And that includes sort of the timing of the very last drink that the individual had. Is that right?
Yes.
If your drinking pattern is sort of different than what you assume for purposes of your calculation, then you'd agree that your entire extrapolation would be incorrect. Is that right?
Yes, it could be.
And again, those assumptions sort of included the time of the incident, right?
Yes.
And importantly, the time of the last drink.
So those two will be what we use. It's the time of the blood draw as well as the time of the incident or last drink.
And your report acknowledges that the testing that was used to obtain ethanol results in this case was not performed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
Correct.
And for that reason, the report and those results do not fall under your forensic lab accreditation standards.
Correct.
The Massachusetts State Police, as you testified, is an accredited forensic lab.
Yes.
And so you're required to meet certain minimum standards in order to uphold that.
Yes.
And you'd agree that those accreditation standards are different from accreditation standards that, say, a hospital lab might have.
They can be.
And do you ever work on testing within the Massachusetts State Police Lab for serum tests or whole blood tests?
So we did test the blood and serum for alcohol content at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab. Yes.
And their typical protocols are to use whole blood tests.
We use whole blood or serum.
In terms of the machinery that's used with the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, you'd agree that the gold standard is gas chromatography and mass spectrometry machines.
Usually with a
Actually-
headspace detector.
I'll let it, go ahead, you can
Sorry.
answer that.
Usually with a headspace detector, yes.
And that would detect whole blood rather than serum.
No, it just detects any volatile substance.
But you'd agree that a serum test, usually, as you testified, has a much higher level than whole blood.
Yeah, due to the nature of the substance itself.
And so you kind of have to go through this extra step of trying to extrapolate, okay, how do I convert this to get to whole blood?
So what we incorporated anytime we had a serum sample submitted to the lab for alcohol testing, we actually did the same serum conversion in order to figure out what the blood alcohol concentration would have been.
And that's an extra step that you have to take using conversion factors, correct?
Yep, that's a calculation.
You're not actually testing for ethanol in the blood. You're testing for an ADH, and then you have to do a conversion to get it to what a whole blood test would just automatically show you.
Yeah, so we get the serum level and then we convert it via calculation.
And typically in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, you would do what's called confirmatory testing.
Yeah, so we have a screening method as well as a confirmatory test, correct?
And confirmatory testing means that you take two separate samples and you test both of those.
Essentially, well, our protocol involved testing in duplicate, but that's not always the case for the other drugs that we tested. We essentially have a screening test, which is one type of test, and then the confirmatory test would be a separate test, or sometimes even the same test, just we run the sample again.
And the reason you typically would do two tests is to ensure that there's no error in the testing.
Correct.
And that acts as a fail-safe against false positives. You
Yes.
agree with that? And it also ensures that you're testing the correct sample.
Correct.
And in this case, obviously, you didn't conduct any of the testing.
Correct.
You're just assuming the accuracy of a single test that was performed by a hospital.
Actually,
I'll allow it.
yeah.
And so if the clinical results are invalid, then your extrapolation is going to be invalid.
Yes.
Now, you discussed a lot about sort of serum testing and conversion rates. Do you recall that testimony?
Yeah.
And you'd agree that the precise conversion rate between serum ethanol levels and whole blood ethanol levels is almost impossible to accurately predict.
For each individual person, it would be difficult. Yes.
And that's because the amount of water in our blood is scientifically impossible to predict with accuracy.
I'm not aware of any kind of test that would do that. So, yeah.
Because individuals are different, right?
Yes.
And so the conversions that you use are based on averages from scientific studies.
Yes.
But you'd agree that in certain instances, people can fall outside of that average range.
Yeah.
In fact, a comparison of hospital serum alcohol levels, they range quite wildly. You agree with that?
Yeah.
In fact, you're aware that some studies show that a conversion rate from serum alcohol to blood alcohol can be as high as 1.59%.
I wasn't aware of those numbers, but yeah, it could range. That's why we give a wide range, and you could lie on the outskirts of either side.
And so that would mean that the actual blood alcohol content, once it goes through the conversion rate, would be much, much lower than sort of the average conversion rate that you relied on.
Yeah, it could be both higher and lower.
And that includes that range that you gave, right?
Yeah, it could fall within either range.
So yeah, she's pointing out that there's mathematics involved. There are ranges that are taken from scientific studies, but you can always have an individual who falls outside of that range. So when that happens, what do? Do you just discard that person? And then just say, well, no, you should be within the range of like normal people. So far it's a good cross-examination. Wendy W, thanks for the super chat. My daughter went to Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania. Wonderful. What so great to hear from a proud mama. All right.
You'd agree that the more imprecise an extrapolation is, the less reliable it is.
Yeah, you do have to base it on good. Your starting blocks have to be good. So you have to know the times in which the blood was drawn, the time of the incident, and essentially what your value was for your BAC.
And the time of the last drink, you'd want to know that?
So we would put that around the time, either the time of the last drink or the incident date.
And so the more sort of unknowns you're trying to account for, you'd agree the less reliable your end result is going to be.
It could be, yes.
And you'd agree that sort of the range you gave in this case, which was 0.135 to 0.292, that's a very, very large disparity.
Yeah.
Almost a sort of 120% swing.
Yeah.
That would be the equivalent of, for example, predicting a child's going to grow somewhere from 6 feet to 14 feet.
Objection.
Sustained.
It's a very large number. You'd agree with that?
Yeah, there's a large range, like I said, due to the factors involved in the calculation. That's how it gets so large.
And that's because you're acting with a lot of unknowns in this case.
Yes.
Now, you testified that your retrograde extrapolation assumes that Ms. Reed reached the elimination phase of processing alcohol at or before sort of 12:45 a.m.
Yeah, we allow for, we start for the maximum at the 12:45, and then it would have been 2:45 for the minimum.
And so for purposes of your calculation, if Ms. Reed drank alcohol after 12:45 a.m. and before her blood was drawn at 9:08 a.m., your entire calculation would be invalid.
Yeah.
No further questions.
Hey, Mr. Lally.
Spray, please.
So in this instance, Mr. Roberts, you're dealing with a time of incident that was known, correct?
Yes, it was given to me that it was at 12:45.
And as far as the BAC or the serum conversion that was coming from a medical record, so that was known as well at 9:08 in the morning.
The time that the blood was drawn, yeah, that was known as well.
Now, as far as the question you were just asked, if the defendant drank alcohol after 12:45, does that include sort of shortly after 12:45, or how long after 12:45 would it take in order to affect your calculations or your retrograde extrapolation?
It's hard to say where that would have skewed it. It would have definitely caused a different time frame depending on how long after the incident or the reported last drink. If there was another drink in between there, it just shortened up the amount of time that would have been prior to the blood draw for sure.
What I'm asking is, would it have any significant impact, or would there be any difference if the last drink was, say, at 1 a.m. versus 5 a.m.?
So that'd be a 4-hour difference. So essentially that could, given the conversion rates, that would put the numbers very different. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, so the 5 a.m. would significantly impact your calculations, correct?
Yes.
The 1 a.m., would that significantly impact your calculations?
No.
Nothing.
Okay. You all set, Ms. Little?
If I could just ask one question. You said that you were given 12:45 as the time that you sort of based your analysis on. And to be
Yes.
clear, that was not something that was provided to you by my client, right?
No.
That was something that was provided to you from a police report.
Correct.
No further questions.
Okay.
Yeah, see, that's an important point too. That's another important point, is that, like, look, she didn't even report that was her last drink.
All right, Mr. Roberts, you are all set, sir. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Right, who's next?
Okay, your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth to call Mr. Michael Trotta to the stand.
Michael Trotta. Is it Trotter or Trotta? Genuine question. Oh, it is Trotta. 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 For the Italians that are watching. Also, let me answer some questions before we do this, so that we don't get too far and away with these questions. Okay, Doctor Who's A675309. Let's do it this way. Why are we worried about KR's BIC when you had a cop admit on the stand to drinking his ass off, then moving around cop cars? Also, Jerry Roth had a similar question. Why does this blood draw matter when cops and the ATF officers are who committed federal crimes on the stand claimed by that they drank and drove? They're not the ones that are on trial. That's why we don't care about their blood alcohol content in this particular case. They're simply not the ones that are on trial. That's why we're talking about hers as opposed to theirs. I know too many that feels like it's kind of an unfair sort of thing, but at the end of the day, she's the defendant. So we do care about hers because there is a DUI charge in this particular case. And also kind of gets into the whole issue of her potentially having murdered John O'Keefe, allegedly. Desiree Boulay, Legalbytes, just letting you know, I got a text from my mom asking for today's recap. My parents are new fans of your recaps. And when I got home from my work, Dad just says, "Where's Alita?" I'm so sorry. Yes, I am still working on that recap behind the scenes. I was hoping to have it ready during the lunch break, but that's going to have to be after the lunch break for sure. Or after the end of testimony today for sure. But the next recap is going to be out much faster than the other one because I don't have the same sort of like travel situation that I did for that. So that absolutely will be out. I apologize to everybody who is relying on those recaps for to stay updated on the case. That one it's a particularly delay and after a long weekend too. Let's see, Spider. MS causes nerve damage, which can lead to muscle spasms, muscle atrophy, etc. It doesn't directly involve the muscles, but it does indirectly. Okay, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Okay, James S. Is it odd with the way Lally has his witness order set up? Was not expecting these witnesses until after we go through all of LE. Yeah, I would think that we would have the medical examiner testify, one of the first people. It is very strange. Let's see, Jackie De Hernandez. Question: do you think the ED doctor would have been less defensive? Oh, the ER doctor would have been less defensive on cross if Yannetti did it. I got major doesn't respect women's vibes immediately. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's possible, but to me, it just seems like a little bit more of a personality kind of a thing rather than I don't know, rather than anything else. That was, but that's my interpretation. All right. Jen Phil 4400 Legalbytes. Why is there such a big difference between levels? How does that happen? Shouldn't they be able to narrow that down? I mean, because this is all a mathematical calculation based on a lot of different factors, biological factors at that can have some variance between people. So that's why. Sophie 1518. I'm listening to the testimony of the ER doctor. What do you do when your witness and an important witness at that is not doing a good job explaining what happened? Ask better questions. That's really what it is. Sometimes you got to cut them off. If they're getting really long-winded, they're starting to really go down a very deep rabbit hole. You have to sort of like, you've got to take a leadership role basically in directing the conversation. That's what you have to do. Sophie 1518, also as a juror, are you allowed to knit or do something else other than take notes during testimony? I'd go crazy if I couldn't do anything other than sit and listen. I don't think so. I don't know of any courthouse that allows someone to knit while on the stand. I know it's a lot of time of sitting and focusing. Let's see. Mike Olson, do you think CW is trying to cover the last part of Cross with Higgins as if they could? Maybe. Orlane Tremblay, is it just me, or is Lally formulating his questions in a way that does no good? He wants the witness to say that it wouldn't change much to drink a bit after, and he says it changes a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what his strategy is with asking the questions the way that he does. Steve, how many of these questions are that you are getting frustrate you? None of them. I love getting these questions. Sarah ER, how many more witnesses does the prosecution have? I can't tell you like right off the bat because there is quite a few, but on their list, I don't think they're gonna ask all of them to testify though. But there's, I don't know. I think that there's going to be a good handful left before we switch over to the defense case in chief. Ardo Risnin, I just thought about the name Majeka. Is Mr. Bytes Lithuanian too, or did you keep your maiden name? Very pertinent to the Karen Reed case. No, that's I've kept my name, at least for now anyway. So Mr. Bytes is not Lithuanian. No. But he has been married into a definitely a very Lithuanian family for sure. So he's been learning as he goes. Alrighty, let's continue with Michael Trotta or Trotta.
Maintaining your face at court.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now hearing for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Michael Trotta, Trotta.
And where do you live, sir?
Sharon, Mass.
How long have you lived in Sharon?
Long in Sharon since '82.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I am the superintendent of public works for the town of Canton.
And how long have you held that position as superintendent of public works?
Since 2003.
And did you work for the town of Canton prior to 2003?
No.
Now, with regard to being the superintendent of public works, can you describe to the jury sort of what are your duties and responsibilities when it comes to that work?
Typical management duties of staffing, controlling, directing, working on the budget, working on scheduling, long-term scheduling, 5 to 10 years, capital planning, overall operations, the day-to-day operations, what it takes to maintain a water system, a sewer system, the road system.
Now, with reference to, if I could turn your attention back to late January, early February of 2022. At some point in early February, were you contacted by a trooper in regard to a blizzard that had happened the week before?
Yes.
And do you recall who that trooper was or how they contacted you?
I believe it was Michael Porter, and I believe the contact was by phone.
Now, with reference to that trooper, is that someone that you knew or you had spoken to before in any way?
No.
And prior to that date, did you know a John O'Keefe or a Karen Reed or anybody?
No.
And as far as anybody within an Albert family within the town of Canton, were you familiar with them? Did you know them at the time?
No.
Now, when you were contacted in that early February of 2022, with regard to the blizzard the week before, what if anything, was the trooper asking you? What kind of information were they looking for?
He wanted to know what the procedure was when we prepare and staff a snowstorm.
And
Yep.
if you could explain.
Sorry, when he said Michael Porter, I'm pretty sure he meant Michael Proctor. He seems a little bit nervous. This guy, I feel pretty badly for him. I hope he does okay on the stand.
To the jury, sort of what is the procedure, or what at that time, what was the procedure, and what was sort of the makeup of what Canton DPW would do with regard to a snowstorm?
Well, we have the town is divided up into, I believe, 29 plow routes, several main routes, and side routes. The routes are generally somewhere between 3 miles and 3.5 miles long. And we have 30, I think back then we had 39 pieces of our own, and probably 30-something private plow trucks. We try very hard to have 2 trucks on a route, but we generally don't get enough. So if we try to have a town truck on a route with a private plow on a route. The private plow is procured through a bid process. They have to have a contract. They have to have insurance, liability insurance, and they have to show that they've paid their taxes to the state and that they have workers' comp. And they have a contract with the town. Then the operations manager is in charge of the on-site, boots on the ground, if you want to call it that. He'll assign the specific truck and the private contractor to a route. Generally, the day before, maybe 12, 18 hours before, the two of us talk. We try to schedule the overtime so that you're not going home at 3 o'clock and then you're getting woken up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to come back. We like to schedule it so when the guys go home, they know when they're going to come back. To the best of our ability, that's what we'll do. We'll tell the contractors when they are expected. And generally, if we're plowing, it starts with a sanding operation. So we would have a sanding fleet, which is maybe a dozen trucks. They'll come in early, and then the rest of the public works people come in at a scheduled time.
And so there'd be about, and correct me if I'm wrong, there'd be about 30 some odd trucks that were sort of DPW trucks.
A few more. I'm not sure the exact number. It's probably 37 or 38 because that counts sidewalk plows too. So there may be, I think there's 3 sidewalk plows. So there's probably 34 or 35, we'll say, between medium-sized trucks and the big construction trucks.
That was sort of my next question. As far as the DPW trucks are concerned, do they vary in size, or what is sort of the range and size of the town?
They'll go from a pickup, 2-ton pickup, F-150 or F-250 Ford, if you're familiar with that, to a medium-duty 20,000 to 22,000 pound truck up to a large construction truck, which is generally 28,000 pounds.
Now,
The large truck is a 6-wheel truck.
and as far as the other trucks, the private ones, those would sort of be subcontracted out through the bidding process. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would the range, as far as the size of those trucks, would that be similar or something different?
They are pickup trucks, usually lighter pickup trucks. There may be a couple of front end loaders. There's probably, I don't think we have I don't think there's any big, heavy-duty trucks, but they're probably pickups, might be couple of Jeeps, pickups, again, a medium-duty like an F-350 or F-450 pickup. Those are Fords, and loaders.
Now, with respect to questions or what you were asked about by the trooper, was there a specific sort of street or plow route that the trooper was inquiring about?
I believe he asked who was down, that's Fairview, or down in Cedar Crest area, that's what we call it. I believe that's what he asked me.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
All right, let's just,
I'm showing you a document. Just look at that, look up when you finish. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, sir.
And what do you recognize it to be?
This would be a plow plan for that day. It's a plow plan for the season, but it is particularly a plow plan for that storm of January 28th through January 29 of 2022.
Thank you. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm about to seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibit.
Okay.
I have no objection.
Thank you.
oh, so Yannetti's going to do the cross-examination.
For you in regard
Oops.
to that form for you that's now been marked as Exhibit 109. Just have a couple questions for you in regard to what's listed there. So with regard to the top of the page, there's a listing as far as 1/28/2022 Boulevard 11 p.m. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And what does that mean, sir?
That means that the first group of workforce, which would be the Sanders, were scheduled to come in at 11 o'clock that night.
Now, as far as the next entry going across the top of the page has 1/29/2022, is that correct?
Yes,
And as far as what's listed as WNS/BM/REC at 2 a.m., what does that mean?
W and S would be water and sewer. BM would be building maintenance. REC would be the rec, and they are scheduled, that would be the balance of the Canton's workforce. They were scheduled to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning.
And that 2 a.m., would that be at the same sort of central location? of
Yes,
all
they
of
would
us?
all report to the Bolivar Street garage. I think that address is 150 Bolivar Street.
Now, as far as the next listing, it states contractors at 3 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And who is that referring to?
That would refer to all the private contractors that would be plowing that day. So again, it's staged.
And sort of the last sort of notation on the top of that, it indicates out at 5 a.m., 1/30/2022. Is that correct?
That would be when we completed and everybody went home.
Now, with reference to the Cedar Crest neighborhood or the area that would include Fairview Road, there's different route numbers that are assigned, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And which route number would include that Fairview?
That would be Lower Cedar Crest, number 11.
And from that, that would include Lower Cedar Crest, Kings, Fairview, and Spring, correct?
Yes.
And as far as the vehicles and the vehicle types that were assigned to that route pursuant to this list, what types were they and who was assigned to?
Truck 30, would be a town of Canton truck. That's a 43 International. Brian Lochran would be the driver. The 43 International is a medium-duty truck. The next up would be 7400 International. That would be the large construction truck. And there is an absolute, a by the yard 4x6, which is I believe that's a small 1-ton dump. That would have been the private contractor that was on the route with the city truck.
And so that truck 30, the 4300 International, is that a bigger truck or a smaller truck than the 1-ton?
Then please again? Then the 1-ton?
Yes.
It's a larger truck. It's a, like a 3 to 5 cubic yard truck, and the large truck is like an 8 to 10 cubic yard dump. That's a dump truck.
And as far as the height on that International, would that be, how much would it be? Taller or shorter than say a 1-ton dump?
If you want, I would estimate that if you're sitting in the driver's seat of a car, you're probably 2.5 feet. When you're sitting in the driver's seat of a 1-ton, you're somewhere around 3 feet. When you're sitting in the driver's seat of this 4300, you're probably somewhere around 4 to 4.5 feet. And when you're sitting in the big construction truck, you're another 8 to 10 inches, 5 feet plus.
Now, when you're driving or when the plow drivers are plowing the roads, what, if any, sort of instructions are they given as far as how to first start plowing the roads when they first come upon sort of dropping the plows and going?
If we're in a plowable situation, which is kind of hard to define, it's generally when we feel that traffic is impeded or may not be able to safely get up and down the street. So that's probably anywhere around 2 inches. They're instructed, and we're expecting the heavy snow. They're instructed to plow the middle of the road, keep the middle of the road open. And as they make their way through the route, they're supposed to push back a little bit. If they try to clean a whole lane and then come back and do the lane again, generally they end up being in trouble and they can't keep up if it's a heavy snow. So they're instructed to plow the middle of the road, to keep the roads open as much as they can before they do their finished cleanup.
If I may have one moment, Trotta?
Yes.
We really just need to know when the snowplow came by 34 Fairview Road. And we need to know from the snowplow driver what they saw when they did plow the road. But I think Lally has a very strong fascination with snow, so he wanted to really get all the details out on this one.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
All right, Mr. Yannetti.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay. Maybe we'll get some better
Good
information.
afternoon, Mr. Trotta. Sir, Michael Proctor called you on February 3rd of 2022. Does that sound right?
It may be, I'm not sure of the date.
It was within days of the big snowstorm, correct?
Yes.
You knew that he was investigating the death of John O'Keefe, which had occurred on January 29th, correct?
I did not know that.
Had you heard that there was a police officer who was found dead on the lawn of another police officer in Canton?
Well, I knew, yes, I knew.
It was fairly big news at the
Yes.
time, correct? And were you aware that that was why Michael Proctor was calling you, related to that investigation?
After he called and identified himself, he said that is why he was calling.
Of course. Now, You spoke with him over the phone only, correct?
Yes,
He never came down to the DPW to meet you in person, correct?
not me, no.
And he never asked to interview any of your employees, correct?
We may have discussed who was on that route and who plowed, but I'm not sure at that time if he had told me he was going to go talk to anybody else.
Oh, so it's your testimony that you may have told him the identity of the plow driver when you spoke with him on February 3rd over the phone.
I may have, but I am not positive.
Oh, did you guys catch Yannetti's change in tone? Oh, so it's your testimony that you told Trooper Michael Proctor the name of the snowplow driver, did you? Well, maybe. I think so. That seems to be what I remember. Interesting. So it seems like if he wanted to properly investigate this case, he would have talked to him. That's what that sounds like what Yannetti's about to get at. Which, that's not attacking this witness at all, but this is just jury, think about this. Oh, interesting. Fascinating. Huh.
Don't have a memory of him asking you who the plow driver was.
He asked, no, I don't have a memory of his exact questions.
But leaving aside the exact wording of his questions, it's fair to say you don't have a memory of him asking you who plowed Fairview Road on January 29th. Is that fair to say?
He asked me about, I believe he asked me about this plow list.
About the what? The plow list?
This plow list.
Right, but on the plow list, there's the name by the yard, correct?
Yes.
All right. There's also, to the left of that, an indication of the name of the plow driver, and it's just a first name and a last initial,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
It doesn't spell out the whole last name, does it?
No.
But you know the full last name, correct?
Yes.
You have a limited number of employees, right? It's not a 1,000-person company, right?
Yes.
All right. And you're well familiar that Brian L. is Brian Laughlin, right?
Yes.
As you sit here today, do you have any memory of whether the name Brian Laughlin was brought up during that phone call with Michael Proctor?
I may have said to him that's who BL was, but I believe I referred him to the operations manager to double check who was on plowing that day.
Okay. You say you may have mentioned the name Brian L. or Brian Laughlin, but again, I'm just trying to drill down on what your memory is. Do you have a memory one way or the other as to whether the name Brian Laughlin came up in that conversation?
If you ask me, do I remember 100%? No.
Okay. In any case, Trooper Proctor, Michael Proctor, never asked to speak with Brian Laughlin when he talked to you over the phone,
He
correct?
did not ask me, no.
I'm going to allow the question and answer.
And how short was that phone call with Michael Proctor?
If I tell you, you're going to ask me, how do I know for sure? I would
Okay.
say a few minutes, whatever a few minutes is.
I'm going to accept that answer.
This
And you
witness
would
is
agree with me
so sweet.
that after, and you, by the way, you were trying to be helpful, correct?
Yes.
After that couple or 3-minute phone conversation, you'll agree with me that Michael Proctor never followed up again with you personally.
That's a good question. I am not sure.
Okay. Well, I'd like to direct your attention to about a week and a half later, specifically the date of February 14th of 2022, which maybe you don't remember the precise date, but around that time period, you came into work around that time period, and you learned that a defense investigator named Paul Mikowski had left his business card for you with somebody on the DPW staff, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently.
Yes.
I do not,
Sir, that means you,
Oh.
don't answer that question. I think he's gonna ask one that's an appropriate one for you to answer, okay?
Do you recall when you came in?
This guy is so endearing. I really like him. I really like him. He just seems like a sweet old man who just, he's just like, just does his work. It's nothing glamorous. It's public works, it's sewage systems, it's snow plows, it's things like that. But he just does his work and he does it well. You know what I mean?
To work receiving a business card from Paul Mikowski.
no,
Do you recall calling Paul Mikowski back?
no,
Do you recall speaking to any investigator from the defense at any point within a couple of weeks after you spoke to Trooper Proctor?
no,
Do you deny telling Paul Mikowski to call Bill Walsh?
Objection.
Sustained.
Who is Bill Walsh?
Billy Walsh is the operations manager for
Is he the Highway Department supervisor?
yes,
Did the name Bill Walsh ever come up in your conversation with Michael Proctor back on February 3rd?
Objection.
Did that name come up when you first spoke with Trooper Proctor?
again, I believe I mentioned it, but I am not positive.
Is it fair to say that the Canton DPW has their own plowing and sanding trucks?
Yes,
Does one of them in particular have a nickname?
if they do, I don't know what they are.
Have you heard one of your trucks being called Frankenstein?
Objection.
Sustained.
You don't drive the trucks, correct?
No, I do not.
But Brian Loughran does?
Yes, he does.
And Brian Loughran was driving the truck that plowed Fairview on January 29th of
Yes.
2022?
Objection.
Let me have a moment.
Yes. It'll stand. The answer will stand, Mr. Lowry.
Let me just have a moment, please. Sure. Can I approach
The witness or the sidebar?
the witness?
Yes.
Sorry. Sir, and I would
Sorry, let me go back.
handing you another document, sir, and I would ask if you would compare that document with the document you have in front of you and tell the jury if it's the same document or not.
Someone sounds like they've got a real lung issue in the courtroom. Okay, we're gonna fast forward. Oh, didn't mean
Does
to
it
pause.
appear to be identical?
Yes,
I will take the one back that does not have the exhibit sticker on it. Thank you, sir. And I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any follow-up, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor, but may I just retrieve the exhibit?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Trotta, you are all set, sir. Thank you very much.
all right.
You have another witness here, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, your next witness, please.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth call Mr. Louis Jutras to the stand.
Okay. Louis Jutras. Got that. And I'm also going to pause it here. We are going to answer some questions. Let me just update this right here so that we can get the, sorry. So we can get the pin chat and all that stuff updated for the next one. We're going to get some super chats and some questions here. All right, folks. Okay. Gunnar 1950. He started in 2023. Thank you for the super chat. Heather S became a YouTube member. Welcome to Bike Club. Very happy to have you here. Hope you can join us for the next members only live stream. Fuster Clucked. Funny name. Thanks so much for the super chat. Did Jackson take the podium mic home with him? Bonnie Scotland. Thank you also for the super chat. Oh, he reminds me of my dad that we lost in 2017. Oh my gosh, I know that's hard. That's hard to lose a parent, but that's, it's wonderful when you can see folks that remind you of the ones that we loved. So heart goes out to you. Doctor Who 8675309. Is this the first witness of someone from the town not knowing all these jack wagons? It seems like it. Also from Doctor Who, are the plow operators allowed to be sober when plowing? I think they're supposed to be. Tish, what does the trial stream schedule look like for next week? For next week, I believe it's a full trial week. I think so. It should be a normal week for it. But we'll see. At the end of the day, I'm sure that the judge is going to give some instruction as to what to expect on that. Okay. Those are the questions. And here we go. Bringing in the witness.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. They took the stand.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Louis Jutras, Jutras.
Oh, it's AS.
And where do you live, sir?
Stoughton, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived in Stoughton?
About 23 years.
And what is it that you do for work, sir?
I work for the town of Canton. I am the manager of the Information Systems Division of the Finance Department.
And
The what?
how long
What
have you
was-
been
I'm
doing
sorry,
that?
what was the last part?
Of the Finance Department.
Thank you.
And sir, how long have you held that position?
Almost 25 years.
Now, if you could explain to the jury, just as far as your job is concerned, what does that relate to, or what is it that you do as a director of informational service?
Sure. So my responsibilities are for the municipal departments and all the technology associated with that.
And does that include everything sort of from cell phones to GPS in town vehicles to security systems, things of that nature?
Yes.
Now, with reference to your department, how many people work in your department?
There's 3 of us in total, myself and 2 others.
So you essentially supervise the other 2 people as well?
Yes.
Now, at some point, if I could turn your attention to around the time of January 29th, 2022, some point after that, did someone from law enforcement or from a police department reach out to you in regard to?
Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. I'm going to be right back. All righty. Sorry about that. Okay. Let me go back about 5 seconds.
Someone from law enforcement or
Nope.
from 22, some point after that?
Sorry.
Around the time of January 29th, 2022, some point after that, did someone from law enforcement or from a police department reach out to you in regard to security cameras or camera systems within the town of Canton?
Yes, I received a notification from the Lieutenant Gallagher that there was a motor vehicle incident in town, that the state police would be looking for some video footage.
And so you received an initial notification from Lieutenant Gallagher telling you that the state police will be reaching out looking for victims.
Correct.
And at some point shortly after that, did you receive any sort of, did anybody from the state police reach out?
Yes. Trooper Dunn reached out. We had a phone conversation. And we had email correspondence relative to dates and times. We had pulled some footage from one site in Pequiside Farm that was put together. And then after that, there was a request for anything facing Washington Street, either from Town Hall or from the library.
And so as far as what was relayed to you by Trooper Dunn, what was sort of the description or what was it that you, were they asking just specifically timeframes, or did you get any other information as far as what you were looking for?
From what I recall, there were 2 different timeframes, between 12 and 1, and then between 5 and 6. That was in our discussion and correspondence relative to Town Hall.
And just to be clear, that's from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. and then 5 a.m. to 6 a.m.?
Correct.
Now, as far as the Pequiside Farm,
Mhm.
describe to the jury sort of what kind of location that is or what kind of town property it is and where it is in relation to the town.
Yes, so the physical area is off of Pleasant Street, which intersects with Washington Street, closest to Dedham Street and the police department. That's a large area, big white house, and we have cameras that, face the entrance, the street, and the surrounding building.
As far as the coverage from those cameras, have you had occasion on either this occasion or prior occasions or subsequent occasions to look at sort of the view that the camera gets from Pequiside Farm?
Yes, yeah, we have a straight shot down from the building, down the entrance driveway, right to the street. The other cameras that are around there's a couple of doorbell type cameras that physically focus on specific sections, and then other ones cover the general grounds around the building and the backside.
All right. So can I interrupt for a minute, sir? Could you please spell the name of the farms?
Yep, Pequiside, Pequitside.
Yeah, that needed to be spelled.
And sir, is it, Mr. Jutras, is it fair to say that the Pequiside Farm cameras cover more of the property and less of the street out in front? Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, as far as that was the initial request was in regard to Pequiside, is that correct?
correct.
And so the subsequent request, what was that in regard to?
That was for anything town hall or library that physically faced Washington Street.
And so the town hall and the library, sort of where are they situated in relation to each other and in relation to Washington Street?
Yep, so they physically abut on either side of Washington Street, right at the intersection of Sherman. They are diagonal to each other.
This would be an excellent moment to have a map up for the jury to see what exactly they're talking about. But because it's a good idea, it's not something that Leslie's going to do.
Now, as far as the recording devices or the cameras on town buildings within the town of Canton, are those, are they sort of uniform or does it vary from location to location or vary within the location?
The physical model of the recorder, as far as the manufacturer, that is the same that we have across 15 different sites. The types of cameras do change, indoor, interior, exterior, doorbell, things like that. But all the actual recording units are of the same manufacturer, just different sizes and models.
And as far as the town hall and the public library cameras, as far as the exterior cameras at least, they face in that area of Washington Street and actually capture portions of Washington Street?
Yes, yep.
Now, as far as the cameras are concerned, particularly the exterior cameras that we're talking about as far as the library and the town hall, how are they sort of set up to record? Is it one continuous recording? Are they motion activated? How are they?
Yes, the cameras, based on size and so on, they are all set up for motion in pretty much all of our locations.
And as far as from your review of those cameras, is there any sort of indication on the footage as far as date and timestamp or anything like that?
Yes, we usually have it in one of the corners or someplace along when we have the video saved off and exported.
And when you were able to pull the video that the troopers were requesting, the date and timestamp affixed to those videos, was that accurate as to what the date and timestamp actually was at the time that it's recording?
Yes, I would believe so.
And sort of those date and timestamps, you know where they come from? Right.
The system is linked to a time server, which is remote and is used from the national standards.
Now, as far as the video is concerned from those, they're motion activated, but how far back do they go as far as how many days pass before, does it get sort of overwritten at some point?
Yes, depending on the site, most of them, because of the motion activated, because of, various request types and so on, and the number of the cameras, we usually try to get about 30 days. There are some that go longer because the site is or isn't used as much. And then there are other ones where, specifically with the library, they only requested to have a maximum of 30 days on that device.
And so when you received this request from the troopers, that was well within the 30 days, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, because we're talking February 7th for the last request.
Now, as far as the video that you exported, well, let me ask you this. As far as when you were asked to retrieve that video, can you explain sort of mechanically the process of how you got that video and how you delivered that to the troopers?
Yeah, so specifically for the town and the library one, that again, timeframe provided, using the manufacturer's software product, doing the search, picking the cameras that are facing the Washington Street side, and then having the time frame and exporting that out. That becomes, depending on the size of it, either a full executable that can just be opened and viewed, or a compilation of files that has a player with it. And then based on the fact that we had already put videos together and that material was picked up, I had sent a file share link for that information.
You had sent that file share link to Trooper Dunn, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as the video that you reviewed, were you sort of parsing, or were you looking for specific areas, or did you just sort of take the whole time period requested and send that off to the trooper?
As far as I recall, it was the whole time frame, just because we only have 2 cameras or so that physically cover the area in question, and he had 2 separate hours in question as well. So they were able to be exported and sent.
Now, as far as this particular video, this is video only, correct? There's no audio that's attached to these cameras?
Correct, no audio.
Now, as far as access to these cameras and the footage within the cameras, who, if anyone besides yourself, would have access to remove any sort of footage from the cameras?
No one.
Now, sir, before we get to the camera footage specifically, I just want to ask you about another area. In relation to also within sort of the ambit of your duties and responsibilities would include GPS on town trucks, correct?
Yes, Public Works has a setup via their radios for GPS information.
And so with regard to that, specifically the DVW trucks, what, if any, information did you receive from anyone at the DVW in relation to those GPS devices within the trucks shortly after the snowstorm from the 28th and the 29th of January?
Yep. So on February 1st, I received notification from the operations manager that the GPS information was not working.
And so you received information after the snowstorm that it wasn't working during the snowstorm, is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as that, as far as GPS sort of going down in the DPW trucks, is that abnormal, or how often would that occur?
Yes, it happens several times throughout the year for various reasons. They have a radio repeater. It's connected through a network. It runs software on a server that we have in-house. Server's rebooted, network goes down, things that, change for various reasons, and we need to reestablish connection to whatever recorder it is for that repeater, and then the information is then picked up.
Now, taking you back to the Canton Public Library video that you provided to the trooper, were you told anything about sort of any type of vehicle or anything to be looking for within that particular video time frame that they were asking about?
Not that I recall.
Did you recall ever actually watching the video yourself as far as confirming sort of what it was?
Yes, I mean, I watched it from the time frame to see that we had information, watched it just to move forward to the end to make sure there was information, and when the recording, was physically available. But what was in it, no.
May I approach?
Yes.
Interesting what he said about that, periodically these things go down, that the surveillance goes down. I mean, I'm sure it's true. But in this case,
Just ask you to, as far as that video from the Canton Public Library, you've seen that video subsequently, is that correct?
This disc with the wording on it?
Yes.
No, I have not seen this.
Not that specific disc, I'm sorry, sir, but the footage, have you been shown that particular video footage, or did you review that footage before you gave it to the troopers?
This is not mine to the trooper.
Understood. May we approach?
Okay.
okay. So, there's been so many things that are convenient in this case that if he testifies that there's some surveillance footage that could be helpful to the defense, it just happened to go down.
Yes.
People are going to find that weird.
Hand that to Madam Court Reporter. Sure, I'm sorry. All right, so the parties agree that this is the next exhibit, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would just ask to briefly, publish
Done.
portions from those.
Hold on. Yes.
Oops, sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the first video portion from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. Mr. Jutras, from what's up on the screen, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And as far as the view from this camera, this is from the library, is that correct?
Correct.
And so as far as what we're looking at here, this is the view from the camera as you observed it on the security camera and as you provided it to the trooper, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, sir, do you have is there a laser pointer up on the desk in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with this area as far as the area of Canton?
Yes, yes. Town Hall is right across the street.
And I'm sorry, I stepped right over your words when you were saying that.
Yeah, so Town Hall is right across the street, and the intersection here is at Sherman, and this is Washington, the longest street that you'll see.
So Washington sort of runs parallel with the street, and then Sherman is the street that appears to intersect with Washington.
Correct.
In the area of town hall.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Cohen, if you could take that down and then just put up the 5 to 6. Again, sir, what's up on the screen? Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Is this essentially the video that you provided to the troopers or retrieved from the Canton Town Library from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. later on that day, January 20th?
Yes, sir.
And the orientation as far as Washington Street, Sherman Street, that's all the same in reference to the earlier. The camera hasn't moved.
Correct.
Thank you. You can take that. I may have one moment, Charlie.
Yes.
Okay, we will.
Confirming
Oh.
the,
Oh, so that's
Good
it.
afternoon, Attorney.
so confirming the state.
Okay, so I don't quite understand what the prosecution was getting at with his testimony other than to introduce those videos, but they didn't actually show anything significant in those videos. Okay.
Police, when they contacted you, asked for 2 hours of video footage, right? Between 12 and 1 a.m. on January 29th and between 5 and 6 a.m. on January 29th, correct?
Yes, sir.
You pulled that video footage, or at least arranged for it to be pulled for the state police, correct?
Yes.
And I believe your testimony was that you checked the beginning time and the ending time to make sure that you had the right time periods for those 2 hours, correct?
Yes.
But you did not sit down and watch 1 hour of snow falling and/or cars driving by the public library, correct?
That is correct.
Didn't
I
do
did
that
not.
for between 12 and 1 or between 5 and 6.
Correct. I did not.
And at the time that you provided the video footage to the state police, did you know whether or not there was any missing footage within those 2 hours?
No. Because again, I did not play every single second of the video.
Understood. It's fair to say, and you're certain, that you did not cut out any of the video footage in those 2 time periods, correct?
Correct. It's motion activated. That's the only piece.
You provided the state police with the raw footage as it existed in your possession at that time, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you knew that the raw footage was only saved for between 30 and 60 days?
That one is less than 30. Yes.
Right. Now, as of early February, when you were dealing with the state police, you knew that Karen Reed had been arrested and charged in court, correct?
I do not recall if I had that information.
You knew that there had been a police officer found dead on the lawn of another police officer in Canton?
At that time in February, I believe so.
And that likely would have been discussed when the state police called you?
I do not recall the conversation other than asking for video footage for Washington Street.
And I'm sorry, sir, if you could just keep if I can't hear you, I guarantee you that these last jurors can't hear you. Could you just repeat that last question?
Yep. Again, when in the conversation with it, we had the dates and the timeframes, and anything else relative to it, I do not recall specifically what conversation.
Okay. So you don't have a memory of why you were being asked for this?
Correct. I know it was for a motor vehicle accident. Who and what, I do not recall if that was ever mentioned specifically.
Okay. And you would agree with me that as the IT director, you had the ability, if you wanted to download the footage onto some hard drive to preserve it, if you wanted to do that?
Yes.
Did any state trooper ever ask you to download and preserve that footage so that it would exist longer than that 30 to 60 day period?
No.
And so it's fair to say you did not do that, correct?
Correct.
You complied with what they asked you to do.
Yes.
Now, skipping ahead to April 6th of 2023, you were contacted by Michael Proctor, a state trooper investigating this matter, correct?
I do not recall.
Do you recall Michael Proctor asking you to provide to the defense in this case the same raw footage you had previously provided to the state police?
No.
And you don't recall telling him that you couldn't do that because after 30 to 60 days, the footage is gone, correct?
I had a phone call with what I thought was Trooper Dunn asking for another copy of the data and telling him that I did not have it and I couldn't recreate it.
I see. Oh, so you assume
If it was Proctor, but no, I thought I was speaking with Trooper Dunn.
Trooper Dunn was the name that you remembered from February.
Correct. That was the first interaction I had.
And
Yes.
when they mentioned state police, you assumed it was the same state police trooper, correct?
Yes.
It's fair to say that once you shared the footage with the state police in February of 2022, you didn't control what they did with it after that, correct?
Correct.
And you have no personal knowledge about how they preserved it or didn't preserve it, correct?
I'll allow it. Do you have any idea?
No.
And one last question. You cannot testify about whether any video was removed from the footage after you provided it, correct?
Objection.
Sustain.
Nothing further. Thank you.
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, sir, you are all set.
All right.
Another witness.
I do not, Your Honor, no. May we approach just on?
Oh, are we just about to the end of the day? I think so. Let's fast forward.
In fair, I understand and
sorry.
tell the lawyer.
Yeah.
So
You are
Jerry,
unmuted.
in fairness, I didn't tell the lawyers that I was hoping to go until 4:30 today. And I understand, as sometimes happens with law enforcement witnesses, they get called away. So that's it for today. Now, next week, I would like to go as much as we possibly can on the days that we're here for full days. So Monday is a full day. I would like to go until 4:30 if everybody can, with the shortened lunch hour. Tuesday, we're not in session. Wednesday is a full day again. We'll go right till 4:30 with the shortened lunch. Thursday is a half day, maybe even closer to 12. And Friday, we will not be in session. So those are dates that we gave you before. So we will get as much done as we possibly can during that period of time. Okay, so those same cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it. You've got a few days off. Just disregard this case. Don't think about it. Leave everything here and have a great few days. We'll see you next month.
All rise for the court, please.
Okay, so next week, going until 4:30 on Monday, 4:30 on Wednesday. Tuesday's not in session. Thursday's a half day, closer to 12. Let me write that down. And then Friday's no trial. Okay.
And for scheduling, I will actually see you over here for scheduling purposes.
Okay. Let's see if there's anything else that's announced to the courtroom. Probably not. But I just want to double check so I don't miss anything. Yeah, this is such a weird schedule for this trial. Come on. We're almost caught up. Okay, so this is now live.
We are underway in the trial.
Okay, so that's it then. All right, so that's the schedule. So just to repeat that for everybody, the schedule next week is Monday full day going until 4:30 p.m. Tuesday no trial. Wednesday full day going until 4:30 p.m. Both Monday and Wednesday are also shortened lunch days. Thursday is a half day ending closer to 12. Friday is no trial. So that's what we've got for that. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, let's get some questions here, shall we? Okay. Suki London, are you being suspicious by any chance? No, never, not in a million years. But I will actually, I mean, just because.
Don't be suspicious. 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 Don't be suspicious.
John Ralphio?
Alrighty. Jerry Roth, Legalbytes, what does published fortunes mean, or did he say portion? He meant portions of the video footage. That is indeed what he meant. Let's see here. The Lucian, do we know why no trial for the rest of the week? I would be pissed as a juror. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the reasoning for these weird schedules here in this case, but yeah, I don't know. They're having these conversations at sidebars, and so the basis for them, I had my impression going into the trial was that Fridays would be reserved for like motion arguments, evidentiary arguments, like things like that. But I don't know. The schedule has shifted so many times. I really don't know. Alrighty. Mr. Brownstone, did you feel the blood alcohol information hit? No, but I do feel like I'm a little bit tired from all of the lengthy questions and answers from today. Janet G, thank you for going through that schedule. Phew, are you still going to be in the US next week? Yes, I will still be in the US next week. So that is going to be that's going to be fun. Alrighty. So Friday we've got a members only live stream. Next Friday we'll be able to do that also on the Friday 10 a.m. East Coast time. And that is all of the questions that we have here. So yeah, this has been a good day. Thank you so much for joining me today for all of the testimony on day 18. The recap should be out very soon for day 17. I apologize that this is out so late. Day 18, we are going to be jumping on it very, very quickly, so that I know we've got a bunch of days. There's no reason why we can't get it out in the next like day or so. I mean, like tomorrow, it really should be out tomorrow. So yeah, that'll be happening, so that I can focus a little bit on some family time. And also, I might actually be coming out with some other content in the meantime as well. This is one thing that is good about this lighter week, is that I can also look at some other interesting stories that have come up in law, that are also worthy of talking about, that I think would be also good stuff to watch. So I'm going to be looking at doing some VODs as well. So we will see about that. Thank you for the reminder in the chat for the poll results. I always forget. All right. Let's see here. Halfway into day 18. How do you lean regarding KR's murder charge? 2,300 votes. All right. 78% said not guilty. 17% said need more information. 4% said guilty. So it's like basically staying where it is, for all of these numbers. So, all right, interesting, but still fascinating. Anything else that I needed to say? Okay, I think that's about it. That is about it. All right. Well, I'm going to go and have some hangout time with my family too. So that'll be great also. Okay, guys. So, thank you so much for joining me, whether it is in live in the chat or on replay in the comments or just lurking in between. I really appreciate all of you guys joining me on this crazy ride today. It was a little bit of a mixed bag of testimony. Some were engaging, some were not, but we got through it together. So all right, folks. So day 19 we'll be picking up on Monday. In between, we'll have those recaps out, and maybe some other content as well. So keep your eyes peeled. Members only stream on Friday for those of you who are members of the channel, either through YouTube or on Patreon. It's going to be an unlisted link, so keep that in mind. So that way folks who are members on Patreon, members through YouTube, can also come in together for the stream. So, and also, of course, thank you to the mods for helping to make sure that dialogue continues to flow while people bring in their different opinions, which are one way or another, right? The poll shows us that there are folks who are in the chat who think that she's guilty. So, I always appreciate seeing those perspectives as well. And I love the fact that folks are for the most part, people are pretty respectful in this chat, which I really, really appreciate also. And as always, we've got the mods to help remind everyone the way that we like to agree and disagree in this particular chat. So thank you, folks. Yeah. Okay, guys. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.